Alright, the first concept we're going to review this week is solving quadratic equations using the zero product property. Now, if you recall, the zero product property simply states that if you have a bunch of factors, let's say 2, a and b, and you multiply them, and the product equals 0, then one of two statements must be true. A must be equal to 0, or b must be equal to 0, because the product's 0. We can see in this first statement, if x times x plus 4 equals 0, we also have two factors. We have x as our first factor, and x plus 4 is our second factor. By the zero product property, either x or x plus 4, or possibly both, must equal 0. In this second example, we have x plus 5 times x plus 4 equals 0. Again, we have two factors, x plus 5 and x plus 4. If the product is 0, then either x plus 5 must equal 0 or x plus 4 equals 0. So how does this help us solve quadratic equations? Let's take a look. Here's a quadratic equation, x squared plus 5x plus 6 equals 0. We're going to use the zero product property to help us solve this equation. Now, in order to do that, we need to turn it into a form where we have two factors equaling 0. Well, how do we take a quadratic equation in standard form and turn it into factored form? Well, we factor it. So if you factor the quadratic, it gives you x plus 2 and x plus 3 as the factors. Now, according to the zero product property, if a times b equals 0, well then a, our first factor, must equal 0, x plus 2 equals 0, and from there we can determine what x is. Or b, our second factor, must equal 0, and of course that gives us an equation that we an equation that we can solve. So from this we've determined that the two values of x that make this equation true are -3 and -2. And of course you can always plug these in to see if they work, and they will in this case and in all the examples. Okay, so let's try the second one. 6x squared minus 11x minus 10 equals 0. If we were to factor this one, we would come up with the two factors 2x minus 5 times 3x plus 2 equals 0. All right, this means that our first factor, 2x minus 5, could equal 0, or 3x plus 2 could equal 0. And that gives us the two solutions, 2.5 and -2/3. In this next example, 3x squared plus 10x minus 8 equals 0, we factor the quadratic trinomial, and that gives us x plus 4 times 3x minus 2. Again, our first factor and our second factor must equal, or one of the two factors must equal 0. So we set the first factor, x plus 4, equal to 0 and solve for x. We set the second factor equal to 0 and solve for x. And so the two solutions to this example are -4 and 2/3. And finally, we have 12x squared plus 17x minus 5 equals 0. Factoring this quadratic trinomial gives us 3x plus 5 times 4x minus 1. Set the first factor equal to 0 and solve for x. Set the second factor equal to 0 and solve for x. And there we go. There's not much more to this. So, on this next slide, I have three equations. What I'd like you to do is take this process and try to solve these equations on your own before you get started on the assignment. So, pause the video now. Alright, let's see how you did. So, for the first one, you should have factored this into x minus 5 and x plus 2. Setting the first factor equal to 0 shows us that x equals 5. Setting the second factor equal to 0 shows us that x equals -2. For the next one, factoring the trinomial gives you 2x plus 3 times 3x minus 4. and setting the first factor equal to 0 gives you x equals negative 3/2. Setting the second factor equal to 0 gives you x equals 4/3. Now in this last one, you should have realized, or you should have noticed, that the equation is not set equal to 0. In order to use the zero product property, you need an equation in the form of a times b equals 0, or a set of factors equal to 0. It's possible to have more than two factors, but we're working with quadratic equations, so you're mostly going to deal with two factors, sometimes three if you take out a greatest common factor. But when you get to Algebra 2, you'll be working with higher order polynomials, so you'll have more factors. But in any case, we need an equation that is in the form of a of two factors, and the product is equal to 0. So we need to set one side equal to 0. So we're going to add 32x to both sides, and then factor the trinomial. We get 5x minus 3 times x plus 7. And so we set the first factor equal to 0 and solve, and we get 3/5. We set the second factor equal to 0, and we solve and get x equals negative 7. And that's solving quadratic equations using the zero product property. It involves factoring, so reviewing the review we did last week on factoring should really help you in this on this week's assignment.